Today we'll take a closer look at the report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs on India and bilateral investment treaties. For deeper insights on the bilateral investment treaties and on the key recommendations of the committee, I'm joined by an illustrious panel of guests. Joining us through virtual platform, Mr. P.P. Chaudhary, Chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. Mr. Damu Ravi, Secretary ER, Ministry of External Affairs. Professor Swaran Singh, Chairperson, Centre for International Politics, Organisation and Disarmament, JNU. Investment arbitration requires lawyers and judges who possess the expertise and experience at international forums. Now, the committee noted that India lacks inadequate number of persons who have the required expertise and experience in this domain. How do we address this critical problem?
Thank you, Kriti. I'm happy to join this very interesting program on BIT. And first thing I think I need to underline is why are we discussing this? You would notice that last year we celebrated the fact that India received for 2020-21 record number of almost $82 billion of investments. This has never happened before. And moreover, it was said that in 20 years of this century, where we have received about $764 billion of foreign direct investment, last 7 years itself received $440 billion of investments. So foreign direct investment and India as a destination is becoming very significant component for India's policymakers, but also for global investors. That obviously throws up not just several new opportunities, but also several new challenges. Now, for instance, computer, hardware, software have emerged as the most preferred sector, receiving almost 19% of foreign direct investment, followed by services at 15%, and so on, telecommunications and infrastructure, for example, 7%. So it's a change of the entire context, which is leading to a whole set of policy reforms. India's ease of doing business, for example, have really improved over the last several years. India has done several other, for example, the decision of no retroactive taxation. Several other such decisions of both initiatives and creating agencies has led to the fact that a model, BIT that was created in 2015, today needs to be revised. And that is where the committee, and I'm happy to have the chair himself participating in this discussion today. And I'm sure he can go into what has led to these, groundbreaking new recommendations, is to say we need to achieve certain efficiency in achieving BITs, but also make it detailed and exhaustive so that we don't end up again into dispute resolution issues that we have faced over a period of time. We have had certain disputes happening. Now come to your question, Kriti, which you mentioned, why it is that we need to create a pool of both lawyers and judges with enormous expertise and experience in arbitration at the global level. India has already signed, ME has signed an agreement with Permanent Court of Arbitration that we could do a certain amount of arbitration within India itself. So it's in the new context here where the committee, I understand, is recommending to create that important pool so that India potentially can not just deal with its own arbitration, but emerge perhaps regional, hub for arbitration for several neighboring countries, or other countries could also use our sort of expertise in that sense. So fundamentally, Kriti, because the context is changing rapidly, is why there is need to sort of revisit and review the model that we have had of 2015. And when committee is reviewing that model, committee is also recommending several other initiatives and things that India needs to do to fine-tune, streamline, and sort of take best benefit of this India becoming a huge attraction for global investors. Of course, India is also now beginning to be an important investor abroad. That's a separate story.
Absolutely. So you're saying that we have to develop our country into a hub of international arbitration. But Professor Singh, given how India is currently focused on pulling in investments and global value chains, especially during the COVID and the post-COVID world order, how important would be these treaties as an instrument?
I think when you're looking at reviewing and revising for the next model of BITs, there are things that are in debate, not just in India, but globally there is a discussion on such issues. You mentioned about supply chains. Pandemic has seen world debating about how to reorganize supply chains that have become far too China-centric.
Yes.
So now one of the important issues that the new model must look at, and this is very significant as part of Make in India as Atmanirbhar Bharat debate, that VIT must ensure that what kind of and what percentage of components in that supply chain would be led by domestic production, domestic services, domestic contributions to the supply chain or value chains, and that's going to be a very significant part of the next model of BIT. Likewise, I think there is a debate around the world now that all these BITs fundamentally look at an agreement between the state and the corporate investor, and therefore talks about promoting and protecting investments, which of course clearly leaves out. I was happy to see Mr. Damu Ravi mentioning about national interests. Now, national interest is not limited to state interest simply. And therefore, there is a whole debate among civil society whether the BITs should also take into consideration of not just protecting and promoting investors and corporate interests, but also looking at environmental concerns, looking at labor rights, looking at several other cultural and social provisions that sometimes become significant depending on which sector one is focusing on in terms of these investments. And another thing is to stretch that whole space of arbitration, create stages where before it goes as far as into a formal arbitration, create stages of pre-arbitration consultations,
Yes.
pre-arbitration negotiations, where you have this leeway of resolving a large number of issues before making them rigid and sort of going to a third party, which makes it difficult. And of course, in third party arbitration, again, there are institutions which state creates, and then there are also individuals which parties to dispute could come together and choose sometime an individual deciding arbitration between them. State can definitely emphasize on building institution, and that is where I think Mr. Chaudhry's report is focusing on how to strengthen both the pool of people who will deliver these arbitration or pre-arbitration negotiation consultations to resolve some of these disputes, but also how to strengthen institutions potentially to go back to the ambition of making Indian hub of arbitration, but fundamentally avoiding situations where you have to go to arbitration in case of investments from other countries.
All right, so there should be no ambiguity. And also you mentioned about the sector.